Earth Month, right? I think, as you stated, it's been a pleasure, to join all of us, or to join all of you, albeit, virtually this time, as it was a pleasure in September to do so. So happy to report that, so much has changed, I think, since the last time we all spoke in September. For those that might have been on the call in September, I think a lot of my comments and sort of discussions were about the plans that Atlantic City Electric had with respect to its electric vehicle programs. And at that point, they were still very much pending. But happy to say that since September, we've now reached the stage in which they have been passed and approved by the commission, and so we're now sort of deep in the great fun of program implementation and management. So wanted to spend today talking a little bit about the approved programs, kind of the thinking along the lines of how we designed the programs the way that we did, and then also really looking forward into sort of what we determined to be next steps as it relates to not only this light duty focused program, but then also what we're hoping to do with respect to medium duty and heavy duty vehicle applications as well. So let's do this. So, I think at this point, we're all pretty familiar with, what has been sort of some extremely ambitious transportation electrification goals as established by the state of Jersey. As we sort of maintained with respect to our first program that was submitted, it seems forever ago now, all the way back in December 2018, was that our role is that the utility, as the energy provider for this part of the state, is going to play a key role in sort of helping the state with respect to the achievement of its GHG reduction goals. We think that in order to reduce GHG reduction, or sort of achieve GHG reduction, tailpipe emissions is a big part of that. And, I think whether it be through the news, whether it be from sort of the marketplace as it relates to different electric vehicle providers, whether it be from the federal government around reference to lots of electric vehicle programs, I think ultimately we all know that EVs are getting very, very popular, not only on the light duty side, but then also you have a lot of companies that have announced fleet electrification programs, a lot of cities that have maybe sort of started the process around developing some initiatives around electrification of large transportation infrastructure, et cetera. So all this is to say that electric vehicle demand is growing. And as the utility, one of the things that we sort of, are forced to think about is, what are going to be the impacts of that additional electric vehicle load and demand on our system? How do we sort of plan, and not only for the deployment of programs that support, increased ubiquity of electric vehicles for GHG purposes, but then also how do we think through what effective management of the additional load growth on the system is going to do moving forward. So with respect to our light duty program, and this is the same thinking that is going to sort of permeate over to our medium and heavy duty program as well. I think what we try to do here is achieve a couple of objectives. One, I think we talk about sort of the chicken and egg problem as it relates to electric vehicles, right? So people won't buy the EVs if there's no charging infrastructure. We can't deploy the charging infrastructure if people don't have EVs. And so I think in order to solve that problem, what we wanted to do is a couple of things. We wanted to provide the incentives, for people to go out and, actually help with some of the deployment of this charging infrastructure. And then also, which we'll get into later on in the program as well, is we wanted to talk about, how is it that we can incentivize efficient management of this charging infrastructure moving forward. So it's not just enough to deploy charging infrastructure if you don't exactly teach customers how to use it in a way that's sort of most efficient and valuable, not only for the economics of the customer, but then also with respect to reliability objectives that we have as a utility. So, we approved a pretty substantial program portfolio. I think the thinking there is that EVs and transportation electrification, has many different market segments. No two customers are the same. No one market segment is the same compared to another. So we wanted to put forward a program that was comprehensive with respect to the different market segments, but then also thoughtful with respect to some of the objectives. And so, there are lots of different funding models, if you will, that our utilities have employed across the country to get out EV infrastructure. You'll find that our program on the light duty side is mostly a make-ready model. So that is, we were pretty particular in say, thoughtful with respect to thinking about EV deployment, if you will, as a combined EV infrastructure deployment, excuse me, as a combined effort between the utility, sort of leveraging kind of the advantages and cost advantages that we have as a utility, but then also drawing in the efforts of the private market as well. As part of the stakeholder process, we had a number of discussions with private EVSE companies to sort of talk through what their goals are. A number of discussions with BPU staff, as well as the Office of the People's Council of New Jersey, to sort of talk about the balancement of alignments, or sort of the balancement of objectives and preferences there. And so where we landed, is a substantial make-ready program in which we are, deploying make-ready incentives to cover the portions of the cost of the installation of EV infrastructure on the customer side of the meter. And so, and make that distinction just because, there are, in many cases, sometimes there are upgrades that will be needed on the utility side. And so our program doesn't pay for utility side investments. Those utility side investments, if we need to make them, will just be financed and paid for in the same way that we do what we sort of normally consider new business. But on the customer side of the meter, we wanted to make sure that we do our part in incentivizing the deployment of charging infrastructure. So we have a public charging program, in which the aim is to get out over 1,000 smart level 2 as well as smart DCFC charging stations. And so I think the dedication or focus there on the sort of moniker of smart is very important. As I mentioned in the beginning, our program is designed to do two things, right? So deploy charging infrastructure and also deploy charging infrastructure that can be used in a way that's beneficial for grid management. And that's where the smart piece comes in. So all of the chargers that we hope to enroll in this program have to have the ability to say emphatically talk back to the utility in terms of data sharing, such that as a utility, we can not only learn about how customers are using this charging infrastructure, but then also start to put our sort of hands around what different customer profiles are with respect to charging times, with respect to cost, et cetera, all in efforts to really get a little bit smarter, pun intended, around the design of programs moving forward after this 5-year pilot. So we have a public charging program, as I mentioned, that is aiming to get out not only level 2 chargers, but then also direct current fast chargers as well, to kind of sort of give you that sort of speed to charge experience. We have a residential EV program in which we're covering the 50% of the rebates for the cost of installation of smart L2s across homes, across our across our service territory. And then, as I mentioned, with respect to this, we're also encouraging and educating customers on the ways to charge their electric vehicles during off-peak hours, in efforts to start this kind of process of supporting what we are thinking about with respect to grid reliability. And then, I'm really excited about this program. You get into program implementation, and you find that sometimes delivering electric vehicle charging infrastructure to multifamily units is sometimes technically challenging, but then it also gets a little challenging from a question of how do we allocate cost perspective. And so, after lots of discussions, with BPU staff, OPC, et cetera, I think along all the different stakeholder groups who are all aligned on the importance of the ability to deliver programs for this very, very strategically important market segment. I think this is extremely important in New Jersey, right? There are a whole lot of multifamily buildings in New Jersey. And so, our position as a utility is that, no matter what sort of home looks like for you moving forward, that shouldn't limit your ability to take advantage or to sort of, be brought up in this sort of transportation electrification, new technologies economy. So we have put together a substantial rebate program that's aimed at delivery of charging stations at multifamily units. And then as well, right? So, you charge at home, then there's the question of, where do you charge when you're not at home, right? And so I think, one of the things I was extremely pleased about was that we've now started in this program, we got approved for workplace, but then not only workplace, but then also fleet charging rebates, right? So I think, been in the industry a while, and, every 2 or 3 years or so, there are these statements and kind of monikers and themes that come up. And so, over the last few years, 2 in particular that, I think used together, I can't count how many times I've heard them at conferences, right? But it's VDG, vehicle to grid, and then also virtual power plant, right? So the latter, who actually knows what that means? But I think ultimately what we, the way we sort of think about it is that the ability to charge lots of electric vehicles simultaneously and then use those for grid services simultaneously is going to be an important capability that we're going to need to have here at the utility. And so I think that this first program with respect to the delivery of charging infrastructure to get charging infrastructure out there specifically for workplace and fleet vehicles is extremely important. And then, lastly, we have, you can't talk about electric vehicle charging without talking about the impacts of demand charges. And so I think if you read through a lot of the policy positions, you read through a lot of things as it relates, to some of the challenges associated with the deployment of EV infrastructure. Demand charges is usually named as kind of one of those key things right up there with respect to upfront financing. And so I think we try to solve the problem with the upfront financing by offering a lot of rebates. What we've done with respect to the demand charges, particularly for DCFC, our sort of fast charging solutions, is we have created a what we're referring to as a transitional demand charge rate of, transitional volumetric only rate of 10.9 cents, which is a full-in volumetric rate, which achieves a couple things. One, in the short term, eliminates some of the sort of financially challenging impacts of demand charges, particularly in scenarios in which utilization is actually expected to be low in sort of early stages of market development. So, we have a lot of ambitious EV goals as a state. We presently don't have a lot of the charging infrastructure out there. And so there's going to be a bit of a sort of curve, as people utilize some, state, other, and federal funding to buy EVs, and then also sort of, use those to charge. So in the beginning stages of market development, it's the expectation that utilization of some of these publicly available charging stations may be a little bit low. And as such, the demand charge is associated with low utilization, sometimes in many cases are very high. And so what we've tried to do is provide a transitional rate that helps sort of ease that over time, all in efforts to use some of the data that we've been collecting throughout the process to eventually come up with a cost of service study that determines what the ultimate sort of rate, if you will, should be, or customers that are on that, charge EVs, if you will, we should pay moving forward. So this is a transitional rate, lasting for 5 years of our program. And hopefully we do think that, from an economics perspective, this rate is going to help, certainly kind of attract the investment, particularly with some of these larger and oftentimes more expensive DCFC charging installations. So, I wanted to really highlight kind of the public, sort of the way that we sort of thought about the, the combination, if you will, between the utilities work as well as the private market with respect to deployment of publicly available charging infrastructure. So, we are kind of in a bit of a, scenario, I think, where we have to really be careful about threading the needle with respect to cost, right? So in many cases, you see utility programs across the country sometimes approach this deployment of charging infrastructure question differently, right? So we often talk about California, with respect to the way that California has decided to deploy EV programs. I remember in the beginning, California sort of said, well, we want to sort of, wait and see as it relates to, what companies may deploy. Ultimately, in California, they decided that a large scale utility programs were the sort of, impetus or catalyst needed to really get the market going. And so, there was a sort of wave of approval of several hundreds of millions of dollars of, utility sponsored EV programs in which, utilities were actually doing a whole lot of owning and operating of charging infrastructure. That isn't the case here in Jersey. I think, for a number of reasons, our approach was that it was maybe sort of best to kind of think about what the combination of sort of the utility, but then also the work of the private sector may do here with respect to the publicly available charging infrastructure. And so, we put together, again, a pretty robust program that specifically gets at this. Key thing to highlight, I think that, this is charging infrastructure that would be owned by third-party providers. So this is the, these are your, private EV companies of the world. Third-party providers will, install and maintain the charging stations. And then, as I mentioned before, there is this rate option that we've sort of put together to help kind of the deployment of this moving forward. So I am, pleased In closing, right, I'll say that I'm really pleased that we were able to work together with a number of stakeholders sort of across the EV ecosystem, that being private companies, sort of internally within the utility ourselves, members of the environmental community, et cetera. And so I think we got to, it was a very amicable place as it relates to the deployment of, or sort of the final settlement as it relates to this EV program. As I mentioned in the beginning, this program was focused on the light duty segment. And so we have actually also just recently, say in the last couple of weeks or so, started to have conversations with BPU staff around what the next step is going to be. So not only the next step with this program, but then also the next step as it relates to medium and heavy duty programs. We initially created some medium and heavy duty programs as part of our original filing, but as part of the settlement process, staff mentioned to us that we're going to have another program process or stakeholder process specifically dedicated to medium and heavy duty. And so we actually removed the medium and heavy duty segments of our program, not because they're not important to us, but rather because we just wanted to sort of, align with staff's objectives of addressing it in this different stakeholder meeting. So we are in the process of defining, I think, not only sort of what our medium and heavy duty programs are going to be, but then also more importantly, the role that the utility should play in not only the deployment of charging infrastructure, but then also the management of sort of what this is going to do with the system. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that we have to think about is not only, how do we get more EV infrastructure out there, but then also what are going to be the impacts of this infrastructure on system reliability. As a sort of position or opinion, right, I think it's, in many cases, you're talking about medium and heavy duty applications. They're usually a whole lot bigger than your light duty applications. And as such, they have a lot more implications as it relates to sort of overall load and grid management for liability purposes. And so I think, we are, attempting to position ourselves in such a way that, we want the stakeholders involved to really take advantage of the, call it abilities of the utility to really create some value in this space. And so, that's an ongoing process. I'm looking forward, to what should be an interesting stakeholder process in that regard. And, ultimately, as I mentioned before, moving from where we were in September, I'm very, very pleased to, be at this point now to where we're actively, sort of getting to the process of ramping up some of these programs. So we got approval. In closing, I'll say we got approval for a program in February. We're in the process of kind of doing some things on the back end to really get rolling with respect to implementation. So if you can, there's lots of information on our website with respect to what we have done or what we're offering so far with the program. And then, I think it's now Q2, so in the process of truly sort of ramping up for program kickoff sometime at the end of this quarter. So really looking forward, to hearing from you all. Again, I certainly appreciate the opportunity, I think, to brief stakeholders, like you on what we've done and our progress, and certainly looking forward to having these conversations continue as we move forward. So with that, I will, pause to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we do have a few questions. Thank you so much. And I think you just answered the one that said, when will we begin to see this rolled out? And so that's, towards the end of this quarter.
Yep.
And it is a 5-year pilot. Is that correct?
5-year pilot, correct.
Okay. So, and after that, what happens?
So that's the fun of it, right? So I think what we hope to do is at about year 2, of the program, after we've launched and then also kind of sufficiently created enough data or collected enough data around how, how charging installations are going, and then more importantly, how customers are using this charging infrastructure. I think the point is to do a couple of things. One, complete a cost of service study with the aim to design, what is going to be sort of the specific kind of tariff or, sort of rate class or rate structure that is most applicable for the use of EV charging, which we've never done before. So, that's kind of the, sort of immediate next step. And then beyond that program, right, I think, I can use what we've done in Maryland as an example. We got approved for a pilot program similar to this one in Maryland in 2019. We're now in year 2 of program implementation, and our semi-annual or sort of semi-program review is coming up at the end of September, in which our plan is to come in and say, well, hey, we've done, this much with respect to our program. We think that the desire for EVs is not going anywhere. Instead, it's just going to increase over time. And so I know for sure in Maryland that we're really trying to position ourselves to kind of figure out or ask for what the next steps are going to be in terms of program implementation, whether that be a kind of doubling, if you will, of the program that we've already got approved, whether it be a, program plus, some that includes some different elements over time, that we're not sure. But I imagine that once we get to that stage in New Jersey, the approach is going to be the same. So long way of saying, I don't think this program is going to be a, one and done type of endeavor, but, rather we'll take back what we learned from this program and efforts to continue to develop, effective programming over time.
Great. And there's a request to, could you put things back to the rebate slide?
Sure. So
And
there's two rebate slides. So we'll you all let me know which one.
We'll keep that up there and see if that's the one. Another question, how many residents avail themselves of these rebates? What's the process and the timing of the steps?
So the question was, how do residents essentially take advantage of the rebates?
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, once we actually go through official program launch at the end of this quarter, all of that will be communicated, to residents through our normal channels, right? We have, for a couple of the kind of like large customers, for example, I think I mentioned there's a transitional rate associated with existing, new and existing DCFC charging stations. And so in many cases, in efforts to get on that rate, you just go through your regular kind of like, I want to request a new rate process, which is usually done through, regular customer service channels. But the same will be the case once we roll out the program here at the end of the quarter, right? So, here on the, Atlantic City EV Smart, website, all of the steps, as well as kind of, all of the how-tos, if you will be laid out pretty clearly there. On the website now, I believe that there's some initial information around how you would sort of maybe go about doing so. But all of this will certainly be revealed in greater detail once we get to program launch at the end of the quarter.
Great. Another question was, are there any ways to foster rental car companies to include EVs in their fleets? Thinking that would be a helpful way to for people who are unfamiliar with the EV driving to transition to this new experience.
Correct. Yeah. So, I think as part of the stakeholder process, these are, we are definitely thinking about, how is it that we actually engage the business community as it relates to doing just this, right? I think the transition to electric vehicles, as the question alludes to, right, is a technology problem, but then in many cases also a culture sort of change, right? So, it's usually easier to do these things more slowly than not. And so we have, certainly had conversations with service providers in the area to think about what that means. Internally, one of the things that we're doing in terms of, our own kind of efforts to change culture is within, I think you mentioned Pepco Holdings is the parent company of Atlantic City Electric, but Exelon Utilities is the parent company of Pepco Holdings. And so within our own fleets in Exelon, we are actually going through the process of electrifying many of our own personal fleets of vehicles in efforts to sort of help with this transition. And I think through the conversations that we've been having with the business community around what this is meaning for us, hopefully, fingers crossed, I think this is definitely, contributing to maybe sort of the expediting of the process of some of these transition in other areas, right? And so, I can tell you, we've had conversations with, taxi providers, we've had conversations with ride sharing providers around what their long-term goals are with respect to the transition to electric vehicles. And so these conversations are ongoing, but, as you can imagine, these conversations, the first question that they ask us as a utility is, well, hey, when are you guys going to provide some money to get some of this charging infrastructure out there? And so in that sense, I'm happy that at least with this program, we've started with the first steps of kind of, getting through that first gating item.
Great. Here's another one. Will Pepco Atlantic City Electric have any involvement in the new offshore wind programs that are happening?
Well, I can say that our planning and capacity people will certainly be involved and interested in thinking about what this is going to mean. As it relates to maybe sort of why this is important for the transportation electrification portfolio. Generally, the way that we think about the use of EVs is for a couple of things, right? So one, not only for sort of immediate reduction of GHG impacts as it relates to tailpipe emissions, but then also there's a whole lot to be said about the use of batteries for grid management, but then also for renewables integration. And so, to the extent I think that, we'll be involved, of course, is thinking through how to maybe sort of communicate the benefits of additional EV charging infrastructure as it relates to bringing on more renewable generation capacity, in this case from the coast, right? So I spent a lot of time in renewables development prior to coming, to Pepco. And one of the challenges that we've had, particularly with wind, installations, is sometimes wind blows and there's places for it to go, the energy to go, and then a lot of times wind blows and there's not. So you have lots of wind facilities that maybe don't generate at full capacity simply because they're just not anywhere for this electricity that they're generating to go. And so one of the ways that we've talked about the values in the long term of electric vehicles as well, if you assume that we hit the governor's goal of having 300,000 EVs on the road, by 2025, knock on wood, then that's almost 400,000 different places and different kind of distributed energy resources to send back some of this, additional generation that is supposed to be coming in, from the coast from, renewable generation. So I think that there are not only immediate sort of near-term benefits of increased EV drivership, but then also if you think about what it means for renewables integration, there's some long-term, long-term benefits as well.
Great, thanks so much. Any other questions out there?
Either I answered everything perfectly, or it's lunchtime and people but I think that these are great questions. I will make sure, I'm assuming you guys have my contact information, so I'll make sure to sort of share some of this contact information. Please feel free to reach out directly. I gotta say, I got my first COVID shot yesterday. So the next couple of days, I think I may be kind of, in and out. I woke up this morning and, I kind of, felt the effects of having the first dose. So please, forgive me if I'm a little bit slow to respond in the next few days, but, given some time, we'll certainly get back and connect.
Well, congratulations on your first shot there. And
one more to go.
Yeah, terrific. There was another question here, and Chris, if you like, I can also allow you to ask directly. The question was, how do we engage and collaborate?
Great. Yeah, so I think steps like this are sort of, the first step, right? So I think I often talk to service providers. I had a conversation with a university, well-known university here in the District of Columbia today, and their question was, well, we have all these things that we want to talk about, but we just don't know who to talk to. So I think the value of some of these events is, to kind of put a name and a face to an objective or a point of contact as it relates to this stuff. And so for us, I work on a team with a bit of an ominous name, right? Like utility of the future. What does that actually mean? But, what we try to do is, facilitate stakeholder engagement around some of these utility of the future focused initiatives. So in my case, it's electric vehicles and overall transportation electrification. I have colleagues that work on work specifically related to microgrids, specifically related to energy storage, and then this kind of new and interesting vertical that we're calling connected communities. And I think, within that, there are different points of contact, and we all work together, tangentially, right? But I think, to the point, right, or to the question, I think quite literally the first step is, having these type of discussions to which our contact information are shared. And, I'm always available to, set up some time in the discussion to have meetings around, not only I think communicating what our goals are as it relates to, in this case, some of these programs, but then also hearing back from the stakeholder community. Because I think, if this approval process taught me anything, I think it's the value of having stakeholder alignment well before you go in front of the Public Service Commission. And so, to the extent that we can do that, I'm always available and willing to connect in that regard.
Okay, I do see a couple more questions.
Sure.
Will this result in the additional hiring of folks by Pepco or ACE to roll this out?
Yeah, so I certainly hope so, right? I mean, I think I'm a living, breathing example of sort of what this is going to mean, right? I mean, the Utility of the Future team didn't exist prior to January 2020. And now our team is staffed with 7 or 8 people, right? And so I think just kind of internally as it relates to this, I think that this is definitely going to result in some, additional job creation for us. But then, maybe to the spirit of the question, right? I think our thought process is that to the extent that a lot of this stuff is implemented, to the extent that a lot of customers start to take advantage of these rebates for installation purposes, one of the requirements of our program with respect to installation is that in order to qualify for the rebate, this equipment must be installed by a licensed electrician. And so, we definitely think that this is, from a jobs creation perspective, we also think that this definitely contributes in that regard. And then, as well, right, I think there are a whole lot of additional new capabilities, all sort of bubbling up under the sort of the moniker of the utility of the future, right? So when we start to talk about vehicle to grid integration, that's a new additional skill set, and we are, certainly working with partners at all different types of levels to define what those skill sets are going to look like. For example, one of the things that I'm sort of working on my free time is we have a demonstration, a vehicle to grid demonstration project, for example, at the University of Delaware, in which we're not only sort of thinking through what call it sort of, what active participation of some of these vehicles in the marketplace is going to look like, but then most importantly, what are the sort of skill sets that we're going to have to determine or develop internally and then also externally to make sure that if this occurs at scale, this can be managed in a way that's effective and useful for not only kind of economics purposes, but then also grid reliability purposes. So, I think that the universe of additional job creation is vast, and to the extent that we keep getting some of these programs approved, I think that only further supports that objective moving forward.
Fantastic. So exciting. And when is the end of your quarter? Is it just the standard? Will that be June?
Yeah, just a standard. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So end of quarter is when we're targeting. Naturally, I think we're now that people are getting vaccinated and things, and sort of very slowly, I think the world is starting to return to normal. As it relates to coronavirus, I think we are now starting to kind of pick up on some of the implementation efforts that we couldn't do before, right? So, for example, many of our residential programs have been halted just because of kind of governor's mandates as it relates to entering homes for non-essential purposes. And so while the installing of EVs is essential in my book, right, there's sometimes we're also often misaligned with respect to what's determined to be essential by others. So now that things are improving in that regard, I'm confident that that's just going to only sort of expedite the time of delivery of some of these programs. So end of Q2 is what we're targeting.
All right, great. Any other questions from our audience? All right, I think we might be okay. I know this recording is going to be a great resource for people who want to check back and take this all in. There's a lot to process, and some thanks coming in to you on the chat to Nekabri.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate your time, and even more so knowing that you're not feeling 100% today. That was
yeah.
great for you.
I would say it's about like
I
feel like 85% okay. It took me. Right. They told me that the first shot you had a lot of arm soreness, and so when I got back yesterday, I was fine. But it took me about 20 minutes to put on my shirt this morning, just because So I wasn't really. I just gave them my right shoulder, and I should have probably given them my non-dominant hand. So it's been a bit of a struggle, but hopefully by Monday things will be okay.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I'm happy to be able to share this information in the form of the recording. And here's another one. Another question. Would Pepco contact electric car dealers to encourage them to include EV loaners rentals to encourage customers to try models out? Unlike cars we're used to, customers need to see a few days and use to see if it will fit their regular use.
Correct. So I will sort of answer that question by stating that we think that an important call it way of achieving greater ubiquity of EVs is to not only provide the infrastructure, right, but like ultimately there needs to be more EVs from which people can choose from. And so while at the utility, we're not actually approved to deploy rebates for the actual purchase of different electric vehicles, I think as part of the stakeholder process, we've talked to a number of car dealerships, manufacturers, et cetera, who themselves have stated that in their long-term plans, our plans to only deploy different types of or largely electric vehicle models across, all of their, vehicle offerings in the future. And so what we have done in efforts to maybe sort of support that is to state, well, we can't directly give people money to buy EVs, but we can, in the remission of our rebates, ensure that these charging stations that will be used can be used by all different types of electric vehicles, right? And so as part of the requirements, for example, for some of our publicly available charging stations, we have made it such that proprietary drivers of EVs that use proprietary plugs, aka Tesla drivers, can also charge, those type of stations that are required, or those type of stations that are used to charge Teslas. In order to receive some more rebate fundings, they must also be built with what we call standard ports that can charge all different types of EVs as well. And so our method is to say, well, if we can't directly encourage or directly encourage car manufacturers to build out EV infrastructure, or to sort of build EVs, sort of more ubiquitous EVs in terms of what they hold in their lots, what we can do is influence the way that the charging infrastructure itself is built. And so what we try to do is be a bit egalitarian in making sure that all different types of EVs, particularly across the different sort of vehicle models that we expect, can charge at our charging stations in the same way that proprietary charging stations work as well.
That's good news. Yeah, terrific.
Yeah.
All right, and as a EV driver, I can share a little personal story. I did a little extra driving last night, and when I got home, I was distracted and I forgot to plug in, and I woke up in a start this morning wondering how I was going to get to work, if I was going to make it to work or not. So I'm really anxious to take advantage of these rebates when they're available, because I'm just plugging into the wall at home right now. So I think I could really use a level 2 charger at my home.
Yeah, trust me. I mean, and not only again, which is what these rebates hope to support, but I think what I hope to do, and what our kind of long-term vision for this program is, and I think eventually it's going to get to a point where one of the services that is offered, right, is in the instant that you forget to sort of charge, right, is to state, well, all you got to do is come home, and just if you remember to plug it in, then the services will be set up such that you can kind of set parameters around what you need, right? So I think what we've seen in lots of jurisdictions is customers will say to a service provider, some cases the utility, some cases it's not. They'll say, you know what, I'm indifferent as to what you do with my electric vehicle between the hours of 8 p.m. when I get home and 8 a.m. when I need to leave in the morning, such that I have a full charge by 8 a.m. And I think what that allows customers to do is take advantage of some of the sort of grid services that can be provided through their own EV, but then also just make sure that their own personal experience is not compromised. And so I think, and that is in closing, right, that is the future, right? And so I think that, the deployment of rebates and incentives in this regard, I think is just the first step to get there.
All right, great. There's a lot of good stuff ahead. Thank you for giving us some insight into that. And here's another one. Is the rebate strictly for the installation or charger?
So great question. The rebate is strictly for the installation of what is required on the customer side of the meter for make-ready infrastructure, right? So, what you define as kind of make-ready is, what we say is essentially everything from the meter up into what we call the charging stub. So all of the conduit, all of the wire, all of the things that you need to have installed such that you can put the charging station on top of it. So the rebates are not for the charging stations themselves. In many cases, the customers themselves have to create the customers themselves have to put together, the customers themselves have to put together the charging, or sort of buy the charging stations in many cases themselves. But what we do is we pay for the rebates, and if you will, with respect to kind of what what is contributed or what is considered the make ready portion of the install on the customer side of the meter, not the utility side. The utility side of the meter we take care of if that update needs to be made. But on the customer side, that's where these rebates are focused.
Thanks for clarification there.
Yeah, that's an interesting nuance. So it's been, we've had to like say that, again and again. So.
Right. Is there still a federal rebate for purchasing an EV or an EV hybrid?
So I think so, right? And I think that New Jersey EDA actually I can't recall if they've actually approved some additional programs. I know that there are some federal rebate programs out there presently within the state. And then also I think it is the expectation that from the federal government, we should get some additional rebate support moving forward too. I think the Biden administration has been very clear about sort of the support of additional EV charging infrastructure as part of, overall responses to climate change. So, not counting, chickens or eggs before they hatch, right? But I think that there's going to be some additional support in terms of rebates. And if that's the case, then, I think that sort of the combination of the rebates that we're providing for the infrastructure and then maybe the rebates that others are providing for the vehicles themselves may put us in a sweet spot to which this sort of increased deployment of EVs can happen a bit sort of more quickly, than we thought before.
Excellent. All right. Any other questions? Okay, and some other resources. The New Jersey DEP has a great website. Their Drive Green program, the BPU, the New Jersey Clean Energy Program is another great resource. So I hope that folks will be able to check those sites as well, and along with Atlantic City Electric's page for those resources. So Nekabri, thank you so much. And in addition to this recording, are you happy to share the slides that we could post as well?
Yeah. I can send them to you after this for sure.
All right, thank you. And you can take your time on that. Okay. All right. So everyone, we really appreciate your time and your interest, and any additional questions you have that you might have missed asking or you think about later, don't hesitate to email us at ACUA. We can forward those on, and we'll be happy to do so. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Nekabri. Take care.
Yep.
All right. Bye-bye. Oh, here's one more. Can you take one more? Is Pepco contacting business owners directly to encourage installation?
I think what we do is we inform business owners of what is available. We have, I kind of work on the sort of strategy and policy side, but we do have, customer sort of engagement representatives to our large customer service group team, or LCS team, that proactively bring some of these opportunities to our, commercial and sort of industrial or larger customers. And so these conversations are definitely had. And so we are definitely, I think, always proactive about sort of trying to being good stewards of information as it relates to what's out there and available. So, we're certainly having these conversations with these customers as well.
All right. So we're going to end now, and but any other questions, just forward them on. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks again.
All right.
Take care.